Well, what is up, guys? It's been a little while since we had a podcast episode come out here at The Way, but we are back, and we're starting off with a good one. We have got Hut joining us, and Hut is actually a leader at The Way, and we are talking about apologetics today, and we'll kind of talk about what exactly that is, but our focus today is going to be on this idea of, are science and God at war? Is there a way for those two things to work together? And Hut is, I love apologetics, and there's lots of different things you can talk about within that. But when it comes to the science stuff, Hut is much more science-minded and smarter than I am. And so I brought him on to kind of talk through some of that. And we're just excited to be back. We've got another episode coming soon. And so, so we're excited to be here. And but before we get started, before we get real serious, Hut, I have a question for you.
What is it? Go ahead.
Are dinosaurs real? Did they actually exist?
Well, there's a lot of different arguments on that. So obviously the one is like fossils are there, oil's there, dinosaur bones did exist, there's there. But there's also this theory out there called pre-seed theory, which is that God placed the fossils and the oil and everything in the crust of the earth before like humans got here, like whenever he was still forming the earth. And so decent arguments can be made either way. I kind of like the idea of the pre-seed theory, but at the same time, it's hard to really believe.
Yeah, I would be kind of bummed out. Like when I get to heaven, I'm going to ask God, were dinosaurs real?
Yeah, yeah.
I really hope he says yes, just because, Jurassic World, like, good movies,
Yeah.
Like if none of that even if none of those creatures ever existed, it'd be kind of a bummer.
It would be a bummer.
My theory, and it's not based really, I think it's reasonable. Like, I think dinosaurs maybe could have existed either, like, I believe in as far as the biblical order of creation that we see, like humans came after the animals. And so we don't know how long that was. Of course, we know that poetically in Genesis it talks about days, and like God did these things on each day, but we don't know how long a day actually was to God at the time, depending on how you view that. And so I think dinosaurs could have been around for a while, maybe prior to Adam and Eve.
For sure.
Or maybe they were around during, the beginning of humans and stuff like that, and then maybe like when the Great Flood came, Noah was like, I can't fit these things on the ark, and he just didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that's a possibility, but also I can't see a world that exists where like humans and dinosaurs coexist.
Yeah.
At least unless the dinosaurs were like in a certain place.
Yeah.
Because I just think that the dinosaurs would just eat the humans.
Definitely, yeah. Having dinosaurs walk around would be terrifying to me.
Yeah, no, I definitely don't want to live in a world with dinosaurs unless they were all confined to like an island, such as Jurassic World.
I wouldn't even visit Jurassic World. I'd be like, not worth it.
Even if because you saw what happened in the movie with the theme park. It was really cool until it wasn't. But anyway, also like what's containing the birds if they get out, which that's going to be the next one. All the birds got out, and they, it's just a terrible idea. So I hope there's no scientists out there trying to bring back dinosaurs in a lab.
I hope not.
But anyways, kind of a fun question to start off with. But we're going to dive into some kind of more meaty stuff that people actually really like. People wonder about dinosaurs, but we're going to be talking about some stuff today that could be pretty crucial for people who are kind of on the fence with maybe not with their faith, but like how do I rationally work out some of the stuff that science says with my faith? Does science contradict stuff in the Bible? But before we get into that, we kind of want to talk about like what is apologetics and why is it important? And so Hut, if someone asked you like what's apologetics and why should I care about it, what would your answer be?
Yeah, so apologetics, in short, is the art of defending the faith to non-believers. This can be to atheists, scientific-minded people. It could also be to people of other religions. It really doesn't matter. It's just apologetics is defending the Christian faith. And it's very, very important, definitely, because there's a lot of lies slung around in the world right now, definitely. Satan, the deceiver, slings around anything that he can. And Paul tells us in the New Testament to always be on guard and have a statement ready and be able to defend your faith at a moment's notice. And that's what apologetics does. That's what it prepares you for.
Yeah, and like you said, there's so many different avenues that you can go down for apologetics, and we'll probably do more episodes in the future. Today, we're kind of looking at science, and basically a lot of this stuff would come in handy when you are speaking with someone who's maybe an agnostic or an atheist. Yeah. Atheists, meaning they believe in no creation and no higher power whatsoever. Agnostics would believe in some sort of a higher power, but still very unsure about it. But a lot of them in the atheist community really cling to science. Honestly, science is kind of what they have faith in.
Yeah.
But that, there are times in my life where I've had, my faith is strong, but I've had conversations with someone who's an atheist, and it kind of left me stumped. And so over years, I've kind of gotten more and more interested in this.
Definitely.
And then especially a few years ago, or a couple of years ago, one of my best friends in life actually walked away from the faith because of some of these things. But here's what we want to get to today: is that honestly, as a Christian, you can have good answers to some of those hard questions. And as a Christian, we got to figure out how should we view science. And when it comes to the really fine-tuned arguments on extremely hardcore scientific theories that seemingly contradict the Bible, what's the Christian response to those? And that's kind of what we're doing today, is looking at that. But later on, we might do a podcast where we talk about defending the Christian faith as far as like the validity of the Bible, the validity of the death and resurrection of Jesus.
Yeah.
You can go that route in apologetics, or why the Christian God over Allah, the God of the Muslim faith, or Buddha and Buddha. I mean, there's so many things you can go into with apologetics. But today, the big question and kind of the focus is, are science and God at war? And that's what we're really going to be going into.
Yeah, I guess kind of just to bounce off of that. So a little bit of my story. I was saved whenever I was in 7th grade. And my first 3 years of college, I was actually a major in astrophysics. And so I've always been passionate about physics and space and just digging as deep as I can. But my freshman year of high school is whenever I really started to get into all of that. And about that same time, I started to hear about evolution and Big Bang Theory and everything like that. And I started to question God's existence because I didn't have a response, like you said. And so in 9th, 10th grade, I prayed to God, and I said, God, if you're real, prove it. And then I didn't pray to him for 2 years. And it wasn't until my junior year of high school, I took an apologetics class, because I went to a private Christian school. And so I took an apologetics class. My teacher's name was Mark Dean, really, really influential guy on my life, and gave me scientific evidence for God, scientific evidence against evolution, and some other things that we're going to get into later in this topic. But yeah, so like definitely 100%, like, apologetics isn't the reason for my faith, but it gave my faith a foundation to stand on.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's super important to me and why I'm so passionate about it.
Yeah, and just within that, just know that, if you're coming into this podcast, maybe you've had some of these questions. Like, it's okay to have questions.
Definitely, 100%.
It's even okay to have doubts. But when you have those questions and doubts, don't be afraid to look into them. Because I think that what you might discover would surprise you. So kind of diving in, I think that we'll kind of start by just the simple question of, does science support Christianity? And are they at odds, like many atheists might lead you to believe? Have you experienced that? Would you say that you've kind of gotten this sense that it seems like atheists would tell you science completely goes against Christianity?
Oh, 100%. I think that the only way that you can really say that like God doesn't exist is by saying that like something else is right. And most non-believers, the only truth that they can uphold is a scientific method.
Yeah.
And that's why they so strongly try to use the truth of science. There is 100% truth in science, but they use that truth to try to go against God.
Right.
And so I guess kind of to ask you that back, does science support Christianity?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the big reasons like why science and Christianity are kind of rumored or speculated to be at odds is because I think a lot of people think that modern day scientists are not theists, meaning they don't believe in God, and that there's not a lot of scientists out there that would believe in God or be Christians. And the problem with this is that it's simply not true. But there are three modern day atheists who maybe you've probably heard of. If you're listening, there's a good possibility you've heard of at least one of them. But there's three modern day atheists who claim Christianity is essentially foolish and not supported by science. And one of them would be Christopher Hitchens, who passed away in the mid-2000s. Christopher Hitchens was a world-renowned atheist who would go around debating people. Another would be Richard Dawkins. Many probably have heard of him. And then Sam Harris. And I would say Sam Harris is probably one of the most prominent.
Yeah, he's one of the most vocal for sure.
Yeah, especially right now. And there's many others that I could mention. But Sam Harris, for example, when asked if science and Christianity are, at odds or against each other, he blatantly says yes. He says without a doubt, he says you cannot. He says you cannot believe in science and also believe in God, and he will say that he draws that line in the sand.
Definitely,
and that's a guy who quite literally millions of people listen to him. He has a very popular podcast out there.
Yep.
He goes on a lot of other popular podcasts as well. I mean, we're talking about millions of people listening to what this guy says. He's been on like late night talk shows, and so he's saying, yeah, they're at odds.
Yeah,
and then also you have Time Magazine. Right, one of the biggest magazines in the world.
Yeah.
One of the probably maybe the most recognized magazine in the world. They put out an article with a headline that said "God versus Science," as if they are for sure against each other.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the article actually said, but they're presenting it as if there is some sort of war between God and science. And then Christopher Hitchens. One of the things that you can bring up is. That there's a lot of scientific kind of founding fathers, if you will, that were theists, that did believe in God. And so Christopher Hitchens will say he'll discount those early scientists who believed in God by just saying, well, belief in God was the only option at the time. And then you have Richard Dawkins. He'll say that, some scientific pioneers believed in God, but claims that's a rarity now. He says that's not the case anymore, that no scientists that are respected in the community believe in God. The problem with that, and this was from this book that I have been reading, it's called Is God Just a Human Invention? It's by Sean McDowell and Jonathan Morrow.
Wonderful book.
Yeah, it's been really solid so far. And so some of the stuff that I'm kind of reading today are from this book, some of the stuff that we're talking about. But Dawkins, Richard Dawkins, he released a book in the I think it was like mid-2000s called The God Delusion.
Yeah.
And so basically saying like, if you believe in God, you're delusional, especially if you hold to science as well. And so, but he's saying that scientists today don't believe in God. But the problem with that is that same year, 3 leading scientists released books favorable to theism. Owen Gingerich, Paul Davies, and Francis Collins, 3 current world-renowned scientists that released books favoring God. So when guys like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins say, and Christopher Hitchens say that modern scientists don't believe in God, that's just not true. Francis Collins, one of the ones that I mentioned, was actually appointed by President Obama to be director of the National Institutes for Health and Science.
Yeah.
And that was just, mid-2000s into, 2012. And so, 2012 to 2016 even. And so that doesn't settle the debate by any means, but it's important to note.
Yeah, definitely.
Leading scientists then and now, this is a quote from the book, and I thought it was really cool. It says, leading scientists then and now derive their motivation for scientific research from the belief that God created the world for us to investigate and enjoy.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a kind of a beautiful statement on how a Christian should view science. It's
definitely the view I have on science for sure. Yeah.
And because science is, I just want to say, I think science is amazing.
Oh yeah, definitely.
The stuff that human minds have been able to discover is truly mind-blowing. And we'll talk about some of that later on today. But basically, the point in this is to say that there are many scientists out there currently who do not view Christianity as incompatible with science.
Yeah, definitely. More than most people would expect.
Yeah.
A lot of people are kind of quiet about it, but like I definitely, when from my professors here at Tech, none of them ever really said that they were theists, but I got the sense that most of them were at least agnostic. Like they weren't willing to completely say God is out of the question.
Yes.
So,
and you'll find that to be pretty common. I think that scientists are either agnostic, which means they believe in a higher power
of some
at the
sort,
least,
yeah.
or they are a theist and they actually have a religion that they hold to. And so just to say that science doesn't support God or that modern scientists don't support God, it's simply not true. It's not factual. But you will have leading atheists who will say that, and people hear it and they go, oh, well, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, like those are really smart guys. They're saying it must be true.
Yeah.
But it takes 5 minutes to do a little research and know that's actually not true.
Yeah.
And Sam Harris, one thing that he brings up, and a big reason why he claims that Christianity and science are at odds is because of what he says are reported cases in the church of actually persecuting scientists, like in the early times. And one that he brings up is Galileo.
Yeah, very
Galileo,
famous example.
If you've been to school, you've probably read about Galileo in your textbooks in science class, especially like in middle school and stuff like that in high school. I mean, you've heard of Galileo.
Yeah.
But Sam Harris claims that Christian tradition at the time was involved torturing scholars, scientific scholars, to the point of madness for merely speculating about the nature of the stars in the center of the earth, which was something that Galileo did.
Yeah.
But the problem with this is that it's simply not true. Sam Harris is presenting an idea that could, if it was true, that would be a problem. Like if I heard that, the early church did persecute scientists, I would be like, oh, like that's not great.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be enough to convince me either way, but I would go, man, that's not great.
Yeah.
But the problem with it is it's not true. Again, something presented that seemingly is true, but it isn't. And in this book, I want to just kind of read about Galileo and the real story behind him in the early church. And this book it's like, if you end up getting this book, I'm telling you, it's a great read. But so there's this idea that, Galileo was tortured and persecuted by the church. And so let's just, I'm going to read a little bit to kind of explain the real story. So, scientists before Copernicus and Galileo did not think the center of the universe as the place of honor and privilege. Aristotle viewed the earth as a cosmic sump where air, water, fire, and matter mixed in to cause decay and death. And then in the Divine Comedy, Dante placed Satan's throne at the center of the earth. But Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler and other scientists saw the heliocentric model of the universe as exalting the status of the earth rather than denigrating it. Galileo's problem was not simply that he challenged the authority of the church. The issue was far more complex. Galileo also upset secular scholars outside of the church whose careers were dedicated to the older cosmology. And so prior to the 16th century, most educated people accepted the primary cosmological model of the ancient Greeks, who believed that Earth sat stationary while the sun revolved around it. And so when Galileo offered scientific evidence against this model, he rattled the cages of both the church and academia. And then it says that Galileo made 3 costly mistakes in his diplomacy or lack thereof that led to his reproof. First, he broke his promise to not teach that Copernicanism was true. Given that the evidence for heliocentrism was inconclusive at the time, Galileo agreed to not teach its truth, but he went back on his word with the release of a work called Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems. Second, Galileo openly mocked the Pope in this same book, and then later on it says that also he mocked the Pope openly multiple times after saying that he wouldn't. And then third, Galileo spoke authoritatively on the meaning of Scripture, which was clearly outside of his area of expertise. He spoke with authority on issues that he simply was not qualified to address. Thus, his opponents criticized him not only on scientific grounds, but also because of his theological views. And so from there, you might think, oh, well, I guess they probably persecuted him after that.
Yeah.
And that's not true.
That would make sense.
Galileo was neither executed nor persecuted by the church for his blunders. After his trial before the Inquisition, he was placed under the care of Archbishop of Siena, who housed him in his beautiful palace for 5 months. Galileo was then released to his home in Florence, where he received a church pension for the rest of his life. He was able to continue his scientific research in areas unrelated to heliocentrism. So, what can we conclude about the Galileo incident? The popular claim that the church persecuted Galileo for advancing science is simply not true. It's a caricature of the truth. And so, basically, what actually happened is Galileo was allowed to continue his research, lived on a church pension, and was totally fine.
Yeah.
There was no persecuting or torturing that happened whatsoever.
If that's persecution, sign me up.
Dude, yeah, for real. If I could, I guess in a way I do work at a church, so I'm living on a pension from the church, but I work for it. But yeah, that's persecution. Like, I guess I'm being persecuted right now.
Yeah.
And so claims like that, that's a problem when you have someone who's a world-renowned atheist claiming things that just aren't true.
Yeah.
And so with that being said, I have a question that I think that we can kind of list some examples to answer, and I'll let you walk through some of them. But the question that we've got to answer is, can you be smart and logical, but also be a Christian?
Definitely. I mean, there's really no reason why not. We've already looked at Galileo and everything, and then there's countless other scientists that we have a list of. Yeah,
let's go. So let's just list a few well-known scientists who believe in God.
Okay.
And we have a pretty long list here. It's only like 11, but we'll just go through a handful. So like Robert Boyle. Mm-hmm. What did he do?
So he studied the pressure of gases and came up with Boyle's law and how like gases contain pressure within certain vessels and within the atmosphere and everything. And so,
so pretty important scientific research that he did. And he did believe in God. Mm-hmm. And then how about Isaac Newton?
Yeah, so he is probably the most famous scientist of all time. He discovered gravity, and he co-discovered gravity with a guy named Gottfried Leibniz. So big advancements in the scientific community. Most scientists today rely on calculus, and gravity is still to this day being studied and discovering new things about it.
Yeah. So, and then Blaise Pascal.
Yeah. So Blaise Pascal actually studied fluid dynamics. So where Robert Boyle studied gases, Pascal studied liquids. And so same things, just different ways that pressure work within gases and stuff. And he also came up with this thing called Pascal's wager, which we're going to talk about later on, but it's a very good argument for the existence of God, or at least living like it. So
definitely. And then how about George Washington Carver?
So George Washington Carver is a very, very famous botanist, one of the
What's a botanist for people?
A botanist is a plant scientist, study plants. Think of it like as a farmer, but science, I guess. I don't really know.
My wife's like one of my wife's best friends actually majored in that, like at Tech.
Yeah, awesome.
Something like that.
Yeah. But he was like the first one that I can think of, the first famous African American scientist, and he also discovered the importance of crop rotation. He did a lot of stuff with peanuts, which no one else had really done before, and also sweet potatoes, which were both man-made plants that he helped like breed out and stuff. And so definitely big influences on today.
And then we'll just go through a few more because they're not too crazy to explain. But I love the last name. How about Werner Heisenberg? Shout out to Breaking Bad.
Yeah, this is not the guy that Breaking Bad is based off of.
He did not create blue crystal meth.
Yeah. So Werner Heisenberg is one of the early pioneers of quantum mechanics. So subatomic particles, protons, neutrons, electrons, quarks, everything like that. He kind of helped get that started, and he came up with the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which relates the momentum and position of subatomic particles and how to discover those. So
sounds kind of important and like something that I would never understand.
Yeah.
And then how about Francis Bacon?
So Francis Bacon could possibly be great last name. Could possibly be one of the most important scientists on this list because he actually helped establish the scientific method, which is what so many atheists today try to use to disprove God, even though he was a theist and believed in God.
Yeah. And then we'll just do one more. How about
Euler.
Euler.
Yeah, so Euler was...
Euler, is that how you say it?
Yeah, Euler.
Okay.
So he is one of the most diverse scientists ever. He had his hand in physics, in biology, in chemistry, in math. He's most famous for his works in math. The constant E in math, that was him. That's what it's named after. And so he kind of came up with that, and that's the golden ratio, and did a lot of work with that. And so
I've got a bone to pick with this guy. I hate math. So
I love
anything
math.
outside of doing like taxes and basic math, anyone who created that, I mean, I guess it's useful, but I have a bone to pick with you because I've failed some classes because of that. But I guess the point in going through that list, if you're listening or watching, is to understand that all of those guys who had some major scientific discoveries or mathematic discoveries, extremely important to our society today. And you would, I think, reasonably say that those are smart and logical people.
Definitely.
Who are definitely science-minded, but they were all theists.
Yeah.
And some of them even Christians. And so I think that is, you would think that wouldn't be that that necessary to talk about, but I've heard so many things that point to this idea that, like, if you're a Christian or a believer in a God, that you can't be like logical or smart even. As far as like, I've heard atheists talk about it like, yeah, I mean, that guy's really smart. I don't know how he believes in God. Like, and it's kind of like, oh, man, you're literally like, you're discounting all these amazing scientists and mathematicians who were theists. And so
it's like if you believe in God, they subtract 40 IQ points from you or something, which is just not true.
It's like, man, that guy's so smart, but he believes in God. Like, that's just, I don't know how you can do that. It's like, well, I guess Isaac Newton and like all these guys were just idiots. You know? And so, so far what we kind of talked about is, first off, like, science and God, they're not at war.
Definitely not.
And I think that's clear. We talked about a few, world-renowned atheists who kind of perpetuate that, but it's just not true. And then kind of looking at, there are a lot of world-renowned scientists, especially in the past and even present, who are believers in God. And so those are things that are really important for us. And so if you're a believer and you're kind of wondering, man, is there a lot of Christians out there who believe in this stuff? And it's like, yes, like some
very
big
much.
role players in the scientific community were theists. And I don't know, but I know that honestly, I know for me, for my faith, like, it wouldn't really matter, but it is like comforting, and it does kind of settle me a little bit to know that people who are like the most scientific minded believe in God, and it kind of puts me at ease a little bit.
Definitely.
And it's something that you can equip yourself with as a believer if you're listening to this and you're kind of, or maybe you're not a believer and you've been having questions of like, how do they rationalize these things? It's like, well, somehow these guys did. But now we can kind of get into some more like detailed stuff, some more factual things that we can talk about in terms of science and Christianity. But kind of as we work our way into that, we'll talk about, in a few minutes, we'll talk about how did the universe begin and life begin? How old is the earth? We're going to talk about kind of some of that stuff. But we said, first, can smart people, logical people believe in God? And then we got to answer the question, is believing in God rational?
Yeah, no, I definitely think it is. And I think that just by listing the list of popular scientists that do believe in God kind of speaks for itself. But a good example of this is Pascal's wager, which I mentioned before. And what it is that Pascal argues that a rational person should live as though God exists and seek to believe in God. Because if God does not actually exist, such a person will only have a finite loss. So like, he'll lose some pleasure, some luxury, might not live the most fun life, but it's really not that big of a deal. Like, I know you and we both thoroughly enjoy our lives.
Yeah.
And so like, even if God doesn't exist, we're still living a good life.
Right.
So like, nothing's wrong with that. But if God does exist, a person stands to receive infinite gains, as in eternity in heaven, and avoid infinite losses, and is an eternity in hell.
Yeah, and it's just, something that I've thought about is, obviously, like, I'm extremely firm in my faith, and I believe that for me, my own experience of God is enough that you could present anything in the world to me, and I would choose God as what I believe in, just because of my experience, what I've seen in other people's lives, literally hundreds and hundreds of times, just in my own world. Like, there's nothing that would convince me otherwise.
Yeah, definitely.
On that alone, but I have thought about, like, man, if this was all for nothing, the worst case scenario for me is I lived an incredibly purposeful and fulfilling life.
Yes. Yeah.
I love my life. I love being able to share with people about the hope of Jesus that I believe that they desperately need for the sake of their eternity.
Yeah.
I love seeing life change. I love ministry. I love the relationship that I have with my wife, which I believe is strengthened and centered on God.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to be a dad. For those listening, by the way, I have my first baby's on the way. And so that's exciting in my life. And I know without a doubt my life is going to be fulfilling, and it's going to be purposeful. And that doesn't mean that, I'm going to have to make some sacrifices because of my faith. But at the end of the day, I'm going to love my life.
Yeah, 100%.
And for me, I'm confident where I'm going to spend my eternity afterwards. And so, I think it's a rational and reasonable kind of stance or belief to hold to.
Yeah.
Just based on that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's some disagreement there, but I feel like that is a valid presentation, Pascal's wager. But then let's look at like kind of another thing that I discovered, which to me points to, or basically a scientist and an academic atheist who had a big change in his life. Some of you may have heard or may not have heard of a guy named Antony Flew. And so Antony Flew, for nearly 50 years, he was the world's leading academic atheist. Like world renowned. This is like all from about like I think the 50s and 60s, all through up until the early 2000s. I believe that he's passed away now. He'd be pretty old if he hadn't. But anyways, world renowned, like for sure the leading academic atheist. But in 2003, this guy came out and he made a shocking announcement that he was now a theist.
Wow.
That he now believed in God. And so this is a guy who spent his life's work was academic atheism.
Yeah.
And he announced that he now believed in God. And it was primarily because of the scientific advancement regarding the origin and nature of the universe. And he actually released a book. And the book was called, or is called, There Is a God, How the World's Most Notorious Atheist Changed His Mind. And that's, to me, is massive, because to have a world-renowned atheist who, the amount of humility and that you would have to completely change your mind after 50-plus years of carrying a belief and teaching others about it, that's massive. And so, but he basically, he says that he became overwhelmingly convinced that there was indeed a beginning of the universe, and therefore it's only reasonable to ask what or who started it. And so when he started to think about the Big Bang Theory, he talked about how important that was to him, because he believed that the Big Bang seemed like a reasonable and logical scientific explanation, but it also, the problem with it is, and we'll talk about it more later, but it points to a starting point for the universe. And he believes that there's strong evidence for that. And so he started to ask, what started it? Who? And so he actually believes that there is no valid or reasonable scientific explanation for the beginning, and that a creator is the only logical and reasonable conclusion to come to. He believes that science simply cannot explain what started the universe, but only theorize on how and what sort of event started it. So basically, science can explain that there was a starting point, but not what initiated the start. And that is a massive hole in the idea that science can reasonably explain everything, because it's not just a small hole. Like, that's a massive problem for scientists. Is okay, founding fathers of science and modern day science believe that there was a lot of them believe that there was a starting point. But we don't know what or who initiated that. But there had to be an initiator, and we don't know the answer to that. That's a huge hole. I mean, that's a massive question. And it was enough to begin to convince and Antoni Flew to no longer be an atheist.
Yeah.
And I think that is that when I read about that, and I thought that was just a huge thing to bring up.
Very, very big, yeah.
Because I think a lot of people think, that a lot of leading atheists just kind of go to the grave with that belief, such as a guy like Christopher Hitchens, who we'll talk about here in a little bit. He passed away in, I believe, 2011.
Yeah.
And then there was another guy, my mind went blank, who passed away a few years ago.
Stephen Hawking.
Yeah. Went to the grave as an atheist. But here you have a lifelong atheist, world-renowned, who actually changed his mind.
Yeah.
And so that does happen. And for him, it happened completely through just logical, scientific discovery.
Yeah.
And so, that's a huge thing to talk about. But yeah, kind of before we anything that you wanted to say about that before we kind of...
Nothing that we aren't about to talk about.
Cool.
So.
All right. So kind of as we transition into a lot of scientific stuff, I just want you guys to know that I'm an idiot. And so that's why it's going to talk through some of these things. And I would try to represent as a person who doesn't know much about this. But it is very, important to talk about and can be very convincing for some. So, buckle down, listen in, even if it's kind of overwhelming, some of it, that's okay. It's, my guess though, is that if you came to this podcast and you're listening to this podcast titled Our Science and God at War, you've got to be interested in some of this stuff.
Yeah.
So, I think it's really important. And so, let's just get into it. The big question, that a lot of people have is, both in the scientific community and as Christians, how did the universe begin?
Yeah, definitely. So before I get into that, if you do have any questions about anything that we've already talked about or are going to talk about, please feel free to come up to talk to me at any time.
Absolutely.
Like Trevor said, I'm a leader at the Way. I work in the sound booth, so Sunday nights, that's where I'll be. I'm a CG leader, so I have a CG, and you're welcome to come to that. Just find me. I thoroughly enjoy talking about this stuff.
Yeah, HUD works on the technical and sound and lighting side of at the church, and so he's in the booth on Sundays in the mornings a lot of times and at night.
Yeah.
And so he's there. Of course, I'm available too, and I can get you in touch with him depending on what you wanted to talk about. And but yeah, we're available. I think that's important.
Definitely. Reach out. Do not
when
be
you're
afraid
listening
to
to
reach out.
this, even if you don't live here, contact us on social media. If maybe you used to live here and you knew us, but you don't live here, reach out to us. We're available.
Sure.
So.
But yeah, so
the universe.
How did the universe and life begin? So one of my favorite verses in the Bible is Psalm 19:1, and it says, "The heavens declare the glory of God; the sky above proclaims His handiwork." And so, if you want to see God, look up.
Yeah.
Just think about all the things that are out there.
I believe Paul actually echoes that.
Yeah, he does, definitely. So with that, kind of going into the argument of like the universe had a beginning and it needed a beginner, a causer. There's a formal argument that goes with that, and it's called the Calam Cosmological argument. And as far as I know, it was first presented by William Lane Craig, which is a very renowned apologist that is still around today. I think he works at Biola University. But there's only 3 parts to this argument, pretty simple. And the first premise is everything that has a beginning has a cause. The second premise is the universe had a beginning. And then the conclusion is, therefore, the universe had a cause, which pretty simple, I think, don't you?
Yeah.
So
seems straightforward.
Yeah, it's simple. So, but there's a lot of implications that this simple argument involves. So, like you discussed with Antoni Flew, he realized that whatever begins to exist needs a beginner or a creator. So like some examples of that is like a car. Like a car can't just pop into existence. It has to be designed and built by engineers and designers and technicians. A painting can't just paint itself. It needs an artist to create it. So just some simple ideas just to kind of think back to and sing. So
or even just, you can get it real like nitty gritty, like even just like making babies.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
a woman,
A baby can't just pop out on its own.
you need sperm
Yeah.
to get to the egg.
Yeah, definitely.
Something has to initiate that. And so, with really with just about anything, like this table that we're recording this podcast on, somebody had to make this table.
Yeah, so just everything that had a beginning had a reason to begin. And so the universe had a beginning, so why would that be any different for the universe? So another aspect of that is that the creator has to be outside of the creation. So like a car can't build another car. And like, so...
Not yet.
Not yet. But even then, it will be humans that design robots
we'll design the car that
only
build
put together. But
which we have, we've designed robots that have a hand in making cars. But still humans.
But humans
did
are
that.
still at the initial creator. And that's kind of how it is with life, like you brought up. So like humans can technically create other humans, but like who created the first humans? And Christians say it's God. Scientists tend to say it's evolutionary chance, and
started with like a clump of cells.
But we'll get into that later. So what characteristics would cause something to be outside of the universe? And so like we have to think about the components of the universe, and very, very simply put, they are space, time, matter, and energy. And so we have to find something that is outside of space, not bound by it, outside of time, outside of material, and not bound by energy. And so God, of the Christian God of the Bible, is described as fitting all of these, actually. So outside of space, he is described as being omnipresent, which means that he is everywhere, all at once. So he is not bound by the laws of space. You and I, we are right here where we are, and we're nowhere else. God is everywhere. So check mark 1, he's outside of space.
Yep.
Outside of time. The only way you can be outside of time is if you're eternal. Which with the big deal about the universe having a beginning is a lot of scientists believed that it didn't have a beginning because that would mean that it didn't need a reason to begin.
That'd be from a scientific standpoint, that'd be much easier to deal with.
Exactly, yeah. But the universe did have a beginning, which means that it is bound by time. It has a set time limit.
And we'll talk about that.
Yes, we will get more into that later. And so God is described as being eternal. He was here always and forever, and will be always and forever. Yeah. It's really difficult for us to wrap our heads around that, but it's true. And so God is omnipresent, outside of space, and he is eternal. He is outside of time.
And I think a way to say that, I guess, would be like God is infinite.
Yeah,
whereas
infinite.
the time in the universe is finite.
Finite, yes. Yeah, that's another way of saying it. And then, so material, being outside of matter. God is not described as being a physical being. He is a spiritual being. So he does not follow the laws of matter. He is not made up of atoms and cells. He is spiritual. Now, he did become physical when he became Jesus and came down to earth, but he is still in and of himself spiritual.
Yeah.
And so he is not bound by matter. And then with energy, he is omnipotent, which means that he is all powerful. So he has more energy than the universe.
He has the authority and the ability to start energy.
Exactly. So so he's all powerful. So he doesn't need any added energy. Like he doesn't need to eat food or anything like that, or like heat himself up. He is just all powerful.
Yeah.
And so and so that's pretty simple. So the universe had a beginning, which means that it needed a beginner, and it needed a beginner that is outside of the universe.
And God
is perfect fit for being outside of the universe, and therefore a perfect fit for creating the universe, which is what he claims to do in Genesis 1. So
and a lot of what we just talked about is kind of that started from the idea that there was a beginning. And you mentioned how for a long time, and maybe even some scientists today might reject it, but for a long time, scientists, the scientific community believed that there wasn't a beginning. That basically that the universe was infinite and not finite.
Yeah.
But there was a discovery that now I think that most scientists would adhere to this discovery today. But basically, and you can kind of help me explain some of the details of it, but essentially Albert Einstein, I don't know what the name of the theory was or what he came
General
up with.
relativity.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so basically he discovered something that pointed to a starting point of the universe.
Yeah.
But then he actually added in what was like,
he divided by zero.
Yeah,
which,
so he
which doesn't work.
He purposefully put in a flaw.
Yeah. To make it to where the universe actually was eternal.
Right.
That's what he discovered.
Yeah, so he actually tried to kind of cover it up.
Yeah.
And then a guy who everyone's heard of the Hubble telescope. Edwin Hubble.
Yep.
He, I guess when they first invented or built that telescope, he was able to look. I think it was like 100-inch telescope at the time.
Yeah, massive for the time.
Yeah.
Pretty small for today, but massive for the time.
And so they were able to look way out into the universe. And he said, I believe that basically what he discovered was like a red light that was.
Yeah. So basically,
I'll let you explain that. I'm not going to act like I'm smart.
Yeah. So what he discovered is that how objects like very distant galaxies and stuff, they appear to be more red than they actually are. And what that is called redshifting. And so what it means is like how whenever a police car or a fire truck drives down the road and it's coming towards you and it's very high pitched, but then it passes you and it gets kind of a lower pitch. That's because as it's coming towards you, the sound waves gets more compressed, so it makes it a higher pitch. But whenever it passes you, it's moving away, so it gets a lower pitch because the wavelengths get longer.
Right.
Same thing happens with light. Light is a wave just like sound is a wave. And so things very, very far away, they're moving away from us very, very fast. And so as the light travels us, it spreads out and it turns red. And so that's redshifting, which is what he discovered to be the universe is actually expanding.
Yeah.
And expanding pretty rapidly. I don't remember the exact number.
Yeah, and it actually in this book, if you're watching, I have the book set up on the table so you can actually see it. But in the book, is God just a human invention, and talks about this, and this is where I read about it. But yeah, basically the universe is expanding.
Yeah, and
which
so
means the universe is growing.
Yeah, the idea of that is that the universe is expanding. So if you reverse time, it will be contracting, and it will contract down to a singular
Eventually,
point.
Yeah. And so, like, if we could literally, if we had a universal camera, and we were able to rewind time, this discovery, what it points to is that eventually you would get back to a starting point.
Yes.
Where the universe didn't exist theoretically.
Yeah.
And so this was a massive discovery. This basically, what this points to is that the universe is constantly expanding, which means it had a starting point. There was the term that I read was initial singularity. Is what cosmologists believe in, and so basically, like, let's say something like the Big Bang Theory. Which is not to me, it's not a crazy theory.
Yeah,
like I think
it's not too wild.
It's a possibility that's actually how God,
a God ordained Big Bang Theory.
That's
not
how we
a
kind
Big
of
Bang Theory in and
explain
of itself.
And so basically, like, let's say that it is the Big Bang. That's how God did it. That was not only the beginning of matter and energy, but the beginning of space time itself.
Yeah, definitely.
And so this, but this idea, this discovery that there was a beginning, is massive. And that's kind of what Hutt was talking from when he talked about, in order to start something, you've got to be outside of it. And so when he was walking through that, all of that was based on there being a beginning.
Yeah.
And that was actually discovered, kind of co-discovered by Albert Einstein and Edwin Hubble.
Yeah, definitely labeled as Einstein's biggest blunder is that he did that. And if it was like truly an accident, it probably would have been discovered and he would be like, oh, sorry, let me go back and do it. But like he hid it and slipped it in, and he was like, universe is eternal, and the scientific community of the day praised him and was like, yes, finally someone proved it. But then Edwin Hubble came back and was like, no, it actually had a start, and here's why. And so everyone re-looked at Einstein saying, and was like, you lied? And he's like, yeah, I did, because I didn't want to face that truth.
Yeah.
And so
yeah, because obviously that does change things.
It very much changes
even
things.
For believers, that could change things, because we'd have to go, okay, so like God is infinite, we believe that.
Yeah.
So was the universe also infinite? So like, did the universe and God, was it just? But this discovery shows that the universe is finite.
Yeah.
And that it would only make sense that God is infinite and
Yeah.
that He created that. He's the one who initiated it and started it. And that, again, that's something that science cannot explain.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And that's if someone is scientific minded and that's kind of what they stake their beliefs on and consider themselves to be an atheist, they've got to wrestle with that. I don't.
Yeah.
And so, but I adhere to a lot of the science that explains everything else. I think it's great. And so, so how did the universe begin? We kind of have talked through that a little bit. Is there any as far as you have the Big Bang Theory?
Yeah.
If you want to kind of explain that a little bit, you could. Or is there any other major theories of what like the starting event?
Like from a scientific standpoint or a Christian standpoint? Or
or how would a Christian balance that?
So from a scientific standpoint, Big Bang Theory is very much the leading argument of the day. It, in short, says that there was nothing and then just randomly a speck popped into existence and it exploded with all the matter that is contained in the universe, which the universe is massive and has a lot of things in it. And so, and this speck is like subatomic size. So the entire universe compressed down into a subatomic particle basically, and then exploded from there. And then just through billions of years, it has been expanding and cooling down and condensing and turning into the universe that we see today.
And so the question that when I hear that scientific theory, which makes sense, maybe that's how God did it.
Yeah.
My question is, where did the energy come from?
Exactly, and that's the biggest issue that the exists with the strictly scientific Big Bang Theory is that there's a philosophical law. I forget the official name of it, but it states, "Out of nothing, nothing comes."
Yeah.
Which means that nothing produces nothing. It can't produce anything.
Right. And so it's one of those things that when I wrestle with that, okay, so the scientific view of the Big Bang Theory is that it just happened.
Yeah.
There was just somehow energy and then it exploded.
And that brings me back to another book that I know is really famous. I haven't read it, but it's titled "I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist."
It's by, is it by Timothy Keller or he wrote?
I don't remember.
I'm gonna Google this real quick.
So you just have to have faith that a philosophical law was just broken right at the beginning of existence, and that the universe popped into existence. Or you could say, all-powerful.
It's Frank Turek and Norman Geisler.
Yeah, that's who wrote
Timothy
it.
Keller wrote another one that is, I think, another good one for people to read.
Yeah.
But
so you have that side on the scientific side, or you have an all-powerful, all-present, eternal, spiritual creator that formed the universe and has been watching over it ever since it started. Which one sounds more reasonable? Just a random happen chance, or an intentional creation by an all-powerful creator? Which kind of comes back to this idea of, it's called the Occam's razor. I know you have talked about it, but the listeners probably haven't heard it. And it's basically a philosophical law that the simplest explanation that can cover all the bases is the one that's right. So it's a very difficult explanation to say that the universe started from nothing completely on its own. But to say that it was started by a creator covers all the same boxes, but it is a much simpler explanation of what actually happened.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, when I hear that scientific theory that energy exploded and stuff, and then I ask the question where'd that energy come from?
No one has an answer.
That, and also it just, when you think about the world today and what came from that moment, to say that it came from nothing means that it also there was no purpose whatsoever.
Exactly. Yeah.
That, to me, there is something deep within my soul. Yeah. That doesn't make sense.
It just irks. Yeah.
And for anyone who settles on that and is just okay with it, I don't see how you can reasonably be okay with that. Because to me, I think about this world that we live in, and it's crazy, and it's it is insane. People are insane, everything. But to think that it all just started from nothing, no one started it and it had no purpose. Like
Yeah.
that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, this idea of like this is pointless, there is no meaning, life is meaningless, existence is meaningless is the reason why there's so much suicide.
Yeah.
Like if I don't have a reason to live, why am I alive? You know,
Yeah.
and so like that's a devastating outcome of this line of thinking.
And I'm
it's
not
like,
saying that
no,
you have
like,
to be a Christian to have purpose,
Yeah, yeah.
but because you can create your own purpose in life, sure. But to say that all life and that this world and this universe,
everything, yeah.
from if you're claiming that there was no creator, that nothing started, you have to say there was zero purpose.
Yeah.
So any purpose that you have made up in your own mind.
Yeah, which is
It's fine.
it's
I
fine,
guess
but
if
like
that's where
it
you want to
won't
land,
really
but-
get you anywhere. And it's,
Yeah.
and again, there's no purpose in creating a purpose for yourself.
Yeah.
So it's just wild. But
And and so if you believe that, like you can create your own purpose, but there's no purpose in your purpose because if it just came from nothing,
it's pointless.
Yeah.
So
and so again, to me, that's another thing that I think points to a creator. And it just seems so much more reasonable to think from one, like a scientific standpoint, that something gave the energy for the Big Bang Theory to happen,
Yeah.
or something like it. And then also that there was someone who created it means that there's probably purpose in it. There's reason.
Yeah.
And obviously as Christians, we believe like God created us for relation and community with Him. He created us because He loves us.
Yeah.
And it's really that simple. I mean, it says in Genesis, it talks about how God created us in His image. And so there's clear eternal purpose there. But the other option is to say there's no purpose whatsoever,
Yeah.
which many people believe.
yeah.
All right, guys. Well, that is the end of part one of this discussion between myself and Hut. There is a part two that we'd love for you to go and listen to. And so thank you for listening thus far. If you would like to continue, head over to part two.